Hey y'all, insight number 4. So before we get to my other absolute favourite chapter apart from the entire book of Moroni, which is Alma 29, that's my other favourite one. We just did Alma 26. 26 and 29, I bawl every time I read them, but anyway. We just had Ammon's fabulous glory of God. And then sandwiched in between is chapters 27 to 28, where there's people who laid down their weapons that are out there with Ammon and Omna and Himni and the other one. I should say their words more often. Say their names. So Himni, Omna, Aaron, and Ammon. Those 4. They're out there with it. Now they're getting slaughtered again. There's more that have come against them, and they've said, look, why don't we go and throw ourselves at the mercy of the Nephites and say, is there somewhere we can stay? Because we're not going to fight. And Ammon says to the king, look, can we do that? And the king's like, well, I trust you, but I don't trust them. You know, they've wanted to kill us many times. They've come against us. We've warred against them. And I know you're one of them, but I know you. And how often do we do that with people? And I will say, look, I trust you, but I don't know about the rest of everyone. Many of us have grown up in different circumstances and have very much deep-seated trust issues where we need to know someone first. And that's why they're able to teach these people. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about, you love them first and then you might be able to teach them. And that's what happened. They loved them first. They were able to teach them. And now comes this time where, well, we trust you, but we don't know about the rest of you, So the king says, look, if you go and pray about it, and that's what the Lord says, then we'll go. So they do, and they go. And it says in verse 27 of chapter 27, or 23, it really starts where they go back to Nephi, and they get met by Alma, who's up there with other people, and says, look, come on in, it's all good. We'll give you the land of Jershon. It's over there by the sea. It's on the other side of our main cities, and we'll put like a guard, like an army there to protect you. And to think of these people, in that if you'd had somebody that you had considered an enemy, and they were coming to you and saying, look, we've changed. This is how much they respected Alma and Ammon and Omna and Himni and the other fella. Aaron. Sorry, Aaron. That's how much they respected these guys. And if you say that these people are good and that they've changed and they've repented and they are now living in a way that we live, absolutely, come on in. We'll keep you safe. So they come on in and do that. And in verse 27, so it says, people distinguished for their zeal towards God. And in verse 27 it says, and they were among the people of Nephi, and also numbered among the people who were of the church of God. And they were also distinguished for their zeal towards God, and also towards men, for they were perfectly honest and upright in all things, and they were firm in the faith of Christ, even unto the end. Now I kind of like to visualize it, the way I see it. Almost if they're out by the sea, then they're probably collecting and fishing. They're probably collecting food from the area, and they're probably gardening. So it was probably become quite an industrious little area of, I know the Nephites had farms elsewhere, keeping animals and so. But by the sea, you'd grow some really rich soil there. You'd grow some really good root vegetables. You'd have a lot of kaimoana, which is seafood. There'd be a whole bunch of stuff. And so maybe that they did that and helped feed everybody, and then they got protection, and it became like this symbiotic relationship. But they were part of it. They weren't just there as an extra. They became part of that people. It's like they were distinguished for their zeal towards God. They were seen as different. Even the Nephites, a lot of them were able to say, hey, you're doing better than we are at keeping the gospel. Good on you. You're a good example to us. They needed that safe place where they would no longer war, yet they were vulnerable. So fearing Nephites wanted to kill them too. They trusted Ammon, Alma, and Jesus, and that going to them for help was the right thing to do. So given the land of Jershon and protected by the Nephites, we see that in chapter 28, if we go over there, the Lord protected them. The Lord does protect them in chapter 28, and do read through chapter 28 because it really shows that although the Lord protected them, they still had a hard time. that good living people, and if you're good living and living the gospel, doesn't mean that you live without suffering, sorrow, and devastation. That's still going to happen. So people are still going to die. A lot of Nephites died protecting them. There was a lot of crying and a lot of sorrow because of the wars that were going on. So just because you do a good thing, the Nephites let them in as a good thing, the Lamanites are all living in the gospel, doesn't mean that you have a trial-free life. So you'll see that in chapter 28, that good living people, just because you're that, and just because you have a zeal towards God and living that way, does not mean you will live without sorrow, suffering, and devastation. Yet, at the same time, you can experience incomprehensible joy, goodness, and deliverance. So where have you, or where do you see this in your life? I've seen it so many times where I've just been like, how am I going to get out of this? And at the, you say the 11th hour, 59 minutes, so like just before the thing, there's an answer. Sometimes my answer comes at 1 o'clock, sometimes it's an early morning, but sometimes it's right before the thing. And it comes. The deliverance comes. The incomprehensible joy follows. Like, oh my gosh, you saved me. The goodness of it. But that doesn't mean I live without the suffering and the sorrow and the devastation. There's, modern day stresses around health, around selling a house, around relationships with your family, around having enough money in this day and age to live somewhere and find somewhere to live, to take care of children. There's some very interesting social structures that are changing all around the world, and some expectations that greatly need addressing if we're to survive. And we're told by President Nelson all of this, if we're to survive any of this. What can we do for others is one of the big things. If we can be distinguished for our zeal towards God, it doesn't matter what's going on that's horrible in our life, we will be able to see that incomprehensible joy. It'll fill us, and we'll be able to march in, just like the pioneers did in their way, in boots with holes through the snow, singing hymns, and still be happy about it, even though people were dying. Because we know more. We have that distinguishedness in us, that's a word, for that zeal of God. We have that. Zeal is that, like we know that, we have that. So no matter what goes on, as I said, I turn to Alma 26 and 29, and I read Ammon's words, and then Alma's words, and then I go read Moroni, because Moroni had it the worst, I think. I think probably of everyone that I know of. Like Abinadi was in chains and got killed, and Samuel the Lamanite got arrows chucked at him. We don't know what happened to him, and even you go back to Old Testament, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego was shoved into some fire, and the Lord protected them. These guys have been in prison. These particular four, and Alma, were in prison, had problems. And yet Moroni wandered alone, chased down for years, like the ultimate Bear Grylls, really. And I think that's the hardest thing, is being alone. So, for me anyway, that's why I go to Moroni and I read what he wrote, because, if he's doing that, that's his personal diary, that's his journal. He probably wrote more. I want to read more of what he wrote and the experiences he had, but he was distinguished for his zeal towards God. And he lived in suffering, sorrow, and devastation, and yet he also knew incomprehensible joy. He knew he had a job to do, and he went about doing what he could. He couldn't really serve others, but he could prepare, and boy did he, and we're grateful for what he did. So, yeah. Where do you and where have you seen this in your life? Think about that. And are you distinguished for your zeal towards God? Alright, hang around. We're going to go look at Alma 29. I'll see you there.